Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another very exciting Civilizations in Review. My name is Ben Lutz. I'm one of the co-founders of Alphusaic, and very excited to sit down and chat about another fabulous ancient civilization. We have with me a content writer extraordinaire, Andy Mond, who will help me co-interview and learn all about this fabulous dynasty. And with us, the writer, Cullen Quitmeyer, to chat about why they chose this empire, dynasty, ancient community, and what to learn from this fabulous place. As you all know, we're live streaming this onto Facebook, so welcome. We are also going to be cross-posting this to our YouTube, our Instagram, our Spotify, and our website. But of course, the best place to get all this information is directly on the article itself. Civilizations 101 on the Alphusaic site, and then you scroll down to Hammadid. So welcome all. It's going to be a fabulous conversation learning about this ancient dynasty in Northern Africa. And I will throw it to Andy to begin reading the 101 word introduction.
Thank you, Ben. I'm super happy to be learning about this, this dynasty, especially because I think that when we think of Middle East, we sometimes don't think of the way that their history impacted Northern Africa. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. The 101 goes a little something like this. The Hammadid dynasty, a subsect of the Zirid Empire, was an ancient civilization that occupied what is now present-day Algeria. Similar to the Zirid, the Hammadid were part of the Sanhaja Amazigh Berbers and followed Shia Islam until their independence in 1048. Skilled both architecturally and agriculturally, the Hammadid Empire survived even their predecessors, escaping initial attempts by the Fatimid Caliphate to reconquer them. During their reign, the Hammadids were active traders operating out of Bija and ushering Algeria into the age of commercial prosperity, similar to, if not eclipsing, the Zirids. The Hammadid dynasty existed for nearly 150 years. And so that is a whole lot of history that you have to sum up in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you for that intro. Cullen, let's sort of jump in. What attracted you to writing and learning more about the Hammadids in the first place?
I think the first thing was the history behind them, first of all, but also a little bit more personal. I am traveling to Morocco in the fall for a study abroad, and the Hammadids, their stomping ground, so to speak, are right next door to Morocco in Algeria. So I wanted to pick something that I, had the possibility to go see and visit a lot of these historical sites. But as I got more into the research about them, they were just super fascinating and really impressive in what they were able to accomplish. And 150 years is a long time, but it's not that long, and they really did a lot with that time. So.
Yeah, seriously. Fabulous. I love that you had the opportunity to connect it to what you're about to embark upon through your study abroad opportunity with this ancient civilization. That's fabulous. So let's sort of jump into what you found the most fascinating to start with, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us. So let's start. What in your research of the 8 sections or even the more reading that you did you find the most interesting about the Hammadid dynasty?
To pick one.
We can pick many, don't worry.
We can pick many. Well, I think the first thing, it says right there in the introduction that they actually survived the people that they split off from. So the Zirid Empire, the Hammadids were formed from them when the Zirids gave Balogan, one of their cousins, I believe, the ability to rule their western lands in Algeria. Hammadids broke off, and then sort of as time went on, the Zirids were attempted to be reconquered by the Fatimids, eventually falling. But the Hammadids, while they did have a first capital, split off and moved capitals and actually adapted and changed their entire how they ran, moved to maritime trade. And I think that resiliency and ability to not only split from a larger empire, which has had a hold on them for a while, and create something their own, and then reinvent themselves kind of halfway through that process to continue to survive and thrive was really interesting. Other than that, their architecture was something that personally I was really a fan of. Their mosques, and we'll get into a little bit, but their first capital at Kalabani Hamad is just like awesome.
Yeah, I personally, because we always talk about, I think in our last one, we really looked at the military alliances and how this little city state became such an integral part of the area surrounding it. And so it was very interesting for me to look at the Hammadid dynasty that broke off from the Zidis. And I was like, so what exactly did that relationship look like? Right. And so in the allies and rivals section, you say that as time waxed and waned, so did their relationship. Sometimes friends, sometimes foes.
Definitely. In the beginning, I talk about how the Ziras were their biggest ally, the Hammadid's biggest ally. From my research, it was more like the Hammadids split off and the Zirids were like, okay, we don't really have a problem with this. You still follow the same religion we do. Your trade is still benefiting us, at least superficially. And they gave them resources. They interacted with trade with them. And then as the Hammadids grew a little bit, run into some problems. So a little bit later down the line, when the Hammadids had moved capital to Bougie, which is now Bahia, they attempted to move into Tunisia and actually attacked some Zirid port cities, which did not work out, as the Hammadids, they did, being of smaller size, rely a lot on mercenary militaries, which I talk about, which was another factor of what eventually led to their downfall. But there were these times where when the economy was high or the situation seemed right, the Hammadids would go on the offensive, so to speak, and break that alliance ship. But as the Zirids did fall before them, we can kind of see who won that proverbial battle, I guess.
This is slightly irrelevant, but I love that the capital of their first city is Bougie.
Right?
It brings me such joy.
It's a nice little tidbit.
Right? It's lasted into the modern era.
Right.
And another thing that you mentioned that has also lasted into the modern era is their architecture and the remnants, and just the words are failing me. Oh my goodness. I'm going to say inspiration because I can't think of the word I'm trying to find, that has had on architecture for mosques and other types of buildings in Northern Africa, especially in that region. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, because you seem to be like super, super excited about that.
Yeah. So yeah. Sorry. Their first capital, Kalabani Hamad, was in the Hodna Mountains in the Masila region of Algeria. And it's actually both agriculturally, we'll talk about the architecture aspect of it right now, but super amazing just because it was fortified militarily, but on the more artistic side, they had 4 main palaces. And each of those palaces had some of the earliest examples of makarnas, which are this really, really intricate honeycombed carving at the corners of mosques and in other like government buildings or palace buildings. And they often took, years to build just because it had to be done by hand, and they were often up high, and it was super intricate. And those are things that we see on mosques and palaces throughout the Middle East today. And not only, should I say, on mosques, but also on churches. It's a slightly different, more lattice architecture. Sorry, this is going a little bit off track, but it's stuff I found in the research. Sort of really shows the breadth, I guess, and the impact that the architecture did have later on from Bougie. When they interacted with the Normans in Sicily, they shared some of this architecture, and you can see that throughout the Mediterranean, but primarily still in North Africa. So it's super cool their ability to weave, I guess, practicality of the military enforcements and also finesse and like an art style throughout all of their architecture.
That's super fascinating. So I'm going to peel back the curtain a little bit for our listeners today. The picture or the image of each empire, I don't choose, or Al-Fuzaiq does not choose until we actually have the article and reading through what they have to like see the pieces that stand out the most. Hammadid was one of the easiest ones to choose for because your first sentence is architecturally, they are magnificent. And the main image is the Qala bin Hamad, like the most infamous long, tall tower. Like that is the main image. Yours was very easy to choose.
Right.
So it still stands today in modern day Algeria,
Yep.
As a monument to the Hammadids' legacy. So tell us more about. I mean, you just did a little bit, but tell us more about that specific structure. And
Yes.
you wrote about it 5 or 6 times throughout your article. So I know it's a very, very monumental part of what they've done.
Yeah, so that was the minaret, which was at Kalabari Hamad, and it was kind of the center of this city. So going out from the minaret, you then had the 4 palaces that I talked about in this almost crescent moon shape. And then from there, the city sprawled out from that one like eminent point. And it contained, I talk about a little bit, but more features of their architectural prowess. So they actually had 2 artificial lakes spanning, I believe, 37 by 67 meters. So big lakes on top of a mountain that were then used to feed their grid-worked agricultural irrigation system to transform these dry sand, or not sandy, dry mountainous terrain into fertile farmland. But stemming from, the minaret was the eminent point of the capital, and kind of let everyone know that this was the Hammadids' land. It was something different, and also very, you could see it from quite a while away.
And I'm wondering if the fact that you could see the minaret from such a distance is why their population was made up of, mostly refugees. You speak about it in the article as well. And also a little bit about the mercenaries and just how that impacted their ability to form a unified culture, mm-hmm. and what the impact was on their ability to maintain their dynasty.
Right. So in the early days, you alluded to it, in the early days of Kalabari Hamad, it was populated a lot by actual forced repopulation. So they took segments of native tribes that were in the region and, I don't know how forceful it was, I wasn't there, but said, you're living here now, and kind of erected the city. But as the city grew, you did have the local traders and caravanners. They built caravanseries to house these nomadic traders, and it actually brought the population of Kalabari Hamad to a spot where it was a economical powerhouse of the region. People would come from all over the Maghreb to trade and interact at this space. And I think the minaret and the architecture in general did play a large role in that. You knew when you were entering this area that there was going to be trade. As I mentioned, the city was already positioned near established trade routes. So they knew what they were doing, and they built a capital that would not only position them in the right place for success, but allow others to partake in that success, I guess. So while they did in the beginning have some forced population, it brought a lot of economic prosperity to the region, up until the times where the mercenaries kind of turned on them. So I talk about the Mahad Tribe, which eventually occupied both Kalabari Hamad and Bougie in 1152. They actually worked for the Hammadid for a little bit, and were promised land during a lot of the raids that they did on Zirid capitals in Bougie as, you know, kind of spoils of war instead of payment. And when that didn't happen, you get the kind of the breakdown of the government system and the culture a little bit, and eventually the takeover. So
I'm reminded of the Chicago song, Cell Block Tango.
Yeah.
They had it coming.
They had it coming. I mean, there's only so much you can push, I guess.
I love all of the random pop culture references that get brought up. Thank you so much for this newest one. And wow, yeah, I'm a little shell shocked of how perfect that fit. They had it coming, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit more about the agricultural piece, because I also really like perk up when I read that in some of these articles, because trade versus like military conquest is a pretty common theme amongst most of these ancient empires, but also focusing on sustainable feeding practices or even like land use practices is less common. So I'm a little interested on you know, what you saw in your research about this part.
Yeah, so in my research, I was specifically looking for something that, you know, differentiated them a little bit, because as you said, those are the trade is a major theme, and I was a little perplexed when I actually looked up pictures of the Hodna Mountains and Kala Bani Hamad at first, because they're pretty rugged and they don't look like a spot where you would be able to, you know, grow most things. But there is a river that runs through the mountains a little bit, and where Kala Bani Hamad is positioned is right at like an intersection of that river. So the city, or where it would have stood, the river would be flowing through almost near the minaret. And so what they did is they built these artificial lakes that I alluded to, which were both used for agriculture and for art and performances. Actually, they had, this is a cool little side tip, but they had performers that would build boats and reenact naval plays on the lakes, which is so cool. And actually the mosques, or not the mosques, the palaces were set up in such a fashion where they had viewing platforms. Regardless, the river fed these lakes, and also had cisterns where it collected water, and then they had a grid-worked canal system of, from what I could gather from the sparse information, some sort of metal lining them, so it wasn't just dirt, but it flowed down using gravity down the mountains to the plains that were set below the city a little bit. And they were able to grow grain and wheat and fruit to originally sustain the people living there. But it became so prosperous that they were able to then trade and gain some economic prosperity through it, which is super cool. But yeah, I mean, they while I was reading about it, it reminded me of, you know, like the aqueducts or a similar system, and it was just really, really amazing. So
it's so funny because I was definitely going to mention when you said, you know, they had the plays and the entertainers who were doing work on boats on the rivers. I was like, didn't they do that in Egypt and in Rome?
Yeah.
And it's just like, how much of this was something that civilizations did independently and just happened to pop up around the same time?
Right.
And how much of this was, oh, I traveled and saw something there and we can do that here? Because like, love to think about how international connections were made when there was no internet.
Unfortunately, what I couldn't find in my research, but have been really interested in, is if Balogan, so the founder of the Hammadids, had prior experience through the Zirids traveling, and if that had informed some of the practices in the Hammadid Empire, because they did start traveling through the Mediterranean a bit later after they were forced to leave Kala Bani Hamad and move to Bougie in 1067. But that wouldn't have informed, you know, the entertaining, etc. in the beginning. But, you know, something cool to think about.
Yeah, that's so interesting. The like reverence for the arts. Maybe that's naval reenactments, but still a reverence nonetheless. That is something I haven't really heard of from the 80-ish empires we already have on our site. That's really, really fascinating. Why, I mean, do you know like why they prioritize that? Just for entertainment value,
Unfortunately,
or?
I wasn't able to find much about that, but I do know they did, and it wasn't just, you know, entertaining or performing. They also had a great emphasis on ceramics and pottery, and those were things that were so embedded in their culture that even when the Almohads took over Khalid Bani Hamad, they resumed the practice of that. And you know, their pottery and ceramics look a little bit different from the Hammadids, which is why we know that they did resume the practice, but they used the kilns and the architecture that was there for practice of the arts because it was so, you know, eminent in the society, which is also pretty amazing.
That's great.
Yeah, that definitely speaks to the economic prowess that they had for that period of time, because nations in this time normally didn't have space to devote to arts if they were always fighting or, you know, just didn't have money for downtime entertainment. But yeah, another thing that you wrote about in economics was kind of their trade on the Mediterranean and their interactions with people across the sea. So how far did those relationships extend, and did they have any impact on the Hammadids?
Yeah, so when they moved to Bougie in 1067 around, they pretty quickly started trading with those around them, starting with the Zirids, who were present on the coastline of Tunisia and into Algeria a little bit. But then, as I talk about, they also traded with the Normans in Sicily, which was their major trade partner. And we see that a lot in their architecture, especially at Bougie, which is a little different than Khalid Bani Hamad. There's no super tall, towering minarets at Bougie, but there are a lot of these. What's the word? Dang, I'm forgetting. The architecture style shifted a little bit, obviously influenced by the Normans, but also from that, we can see the influence that the Hammadid architecture had in the Normans of Sicily, across Andalusia, etc., especially in military enforcements and the ways that cities were set up. But you know, we definitely can see the influence that they had throughout the Mediterranean.
Yeah, I mean, that's very common for most of the North African empires of old, but also like still today. I mean, I remember when I lived in Morocco, and you two both will very soon, the ferry to Spain is literally 20 minutes total. I mean, obviously that's modern technology and blah, 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 but the connections are very, very, very easy still between, you know, Southern Mediterranean or Southern European Mediterranean, Northern African Mediterranean is.
Yeah, you can see them. Like,
you can see them.
Yeah, no, on one coast, you're just like, oh.
There's a cafe in both called The Edge in Arabic and Spanish. So the Edge Cafe in Tangier, you see Spain. The Edge Cafe in Spain, you see Morocco. Like, I mean, that's just visual, and you know, modern cafes are not ancient empires, but like still the overlaps are very, very, very apparent and stemming from, you know, even before the Hammadids. That's really cool that continued. Fabulous. Well, I can geek out about Northern African interactions all day long, and maybe we should at another time. But just to wrap up this call specifically on the Hammadids, firstly, Colin, thank you. What a wealth of knowledge you are, but this article is, my goodness, please, everyone go read it. So many great pieces here. But sort of a final piece of information, a fun fact, anything else you'd like to share about the Hammadids? You did a great job already, so we can wrap here. But if there's anything else,
let me think about something. Maybe not.
Well,
I would say, sorry.
I was gonna say, you mentioned that they're a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
They are, which is very fascinating. I would say, I guess their impact, the impact of them switching from Shia Islam to Sunni Islam following the Zirids, while they were friendly, has had a pretty lasting impression on the region today, just expanding the influence of Sunni Islam throughout the region. Not that it wouldn't have, but they were a pretty important part in bridging the gap in North Africa. And those are, again, still impacts that we see today. So. But
Yeah.
Fascinating. Well, if you're in Algeria, please go to, I think Mahadid is the modern city that a lot of these major sites are located. So please go check it out, to our viewers who have access to go see it. And for the rest of us, until we're able to, please read this larger article on the Al Fuzaiq website. There are so many other key gems and pieces, and of course, over 30 hyperlinks to explore as well. Many of which are the Al Fuzaiq other empires, but still to explore and learn from and connect with. So we'll wrap up here with a huge bunch of thank yous to our listeners for being here today and reading this fabulous article, to Andy for your invaluable insights, and Cullen for creating this expertise masterpiece. You are now one of the foremost Hammadid experts out there, and we appreciate having this article being a key part of our Civilizations site. Again, everything is on the Al Fuzaiq website. That's ALFUSAIC.net. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a nice evening.
Bye.
thank you.